Welcome to Cryptid Monologues. Let's dive into a world where myths meet imagination. Here we unravel chilling tales of cryptids, Bigfoot, Wendigos, dogmen, skinwalkers, and more. These stories are crafted to ignite your imagination. These stories are purely fictitious, and names and/or events are purely coincidental. If you like these kind of stories, please give a like and subscribe. Click on the notification bell to stay up to date. Thanks for listening. Let's get into it. Bigfoot Encounters of the 1849 Gold Rush. In the winter of 1848, word spread like wildfire. Gold had been discovered in the Sierra Nevada. By the spring of 1849, thousands of men and women had flooded the rugged California wilderness in search of fortune. Among them was Elijah Thatcher, a former trapper turned prospector, whose journey would soon lead him to a discovery far more terrifying than gold. Elijah and his small band of miners, including his loyal friend and fellow prospector Sammuel O'Malley, established a camp along a secluded tributary of the American River. They had expected hardship, harsh weather, hostile terrain, and competition, but they were not prepared for the eerie whispers that echoed through the pines at night, nor the enormous footprints they discovered near their claim. One moonless night, Elijah and Samuel were awakened by the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. The snapping of twigs and the rustling of leaves sent a chill down their spines. They exchanged wary glances before reaching for their rifles, their hands trembling as they gripped the cold steel. The fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows against the towering pines. A heavy, musky scent hung in the air, unlike anything Elijah had ever encountered in his years as a trapper. It was an odor both wild and earthy, laced with something distinctly animalistic yet disturbingly foreign. A low, guttural growl rumbled through the darkness, sending a ripple of unease through the camp. Samuel alerted by the sound, his knuckles turning white around the stock of his rifle. "You hear that?" he whispered, though he already knew the answer. Before Elijah could respond, a massive silhouette emerged just beyond the reach of the firelight. It stood at least 8 feet tall, its broad shoulders draped in thick, matted fur. Its deep-set eyes gleamed with an unnatural intelligence, reflecting the flickering flames like smoldering embers. For a long moment, the two men and the creature remained locked in a silent standoff. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the pounding of their own hearts. Then, in a motion almost too fluid for something so large, the creature tilted its head, observing them with an eerie curiosity. Elijah's breath caught in his throat as he slowly reached for his rifle. But before he could lift it, the creature let out a deep, guttural exhale, almost a sigh, before stepping backward into the darkness. Its departure was as silent as its approach, the massive form vanishing into the shadows as if it had never been there at all. For several moments, neither man spoke. Then Samuel let out a shaky breath. "Tell me that was a bear," he murmured, though he already knew the truth. Elijah shook his head, his grip tightening on his rifle. That was no bear. The next morning, Samuel and Elijah, determined to uncover the truth, the miners set out to track the creature. Their search led them into a narrow ravine, where they found crude shelters built from branches and animal hides. Before they could investigate further, a deep, guttural roar filled the air. The ground trembled as the massive creature charged toward them. They fled in terror, barely escaping with their lives. The men behind the gold. With fear gripping the camp, Samuel and Elijah sat by the fire, recounting the choices that had led them to the Sierras. Elijah Thatcher had been a fur trapper in the northern Rockies before gold fever took hold of him. Born to a family of farmers in Missouri, he had spent his youth exploring the wilderness, learning the ways of the land from wandering traders and native guides. The call of the unknown had always lured him forward, and when the gold rush began, he saw an opportunity not just for riches, but for adventure. Samuel O'Malley, on the other hand, was a former soldier who had seen too much bloodshed during the Mexican-American War. He had come west seeking peace, hoping that the steady rhythm of mining would be a welcome change from the chaos of battle. A man of sharp wit and strong convictions, Samuel had a deep loyalty to his friends, but he carried the weight of past regrets wherever he went. Both men had sought fortune in the mountains, but now they were questioning whether they had found something far older and more dangerous than gold. As the night stretched on, they spoke in hushed tones of the legends they had heard from the native tribes. Tales of shadowy beings who roamed the wilderness, guardians of the land who did not take kindly to intruders. As the wind howled through the trees, they realized their pasts had prepared them for hardship, but nothing could have truly readied them for what they now faced. The Sierras held secrets deeper than gold veins, and they were only just beginning to uncover them. Sammuel and Elijah determined to continue prospecting despite the growing unease in their camp. Elijah and Sammuel resumed their work along the riverbank, panning and digging in search of gold. Days passed without much success, but one fateful morning, Samuel's pickaxe struck something solid beneath the rocky soil. With frantic excitement, they cleared away the dirt to reveal a rich vein of gold embedded in the cliffside. The vein was thick, glistening with promise, and unlike anything they had seen before. Their jubilation was short-lived, however, as the air around them grew eerily still. The birds stopped singing, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. A deep, resonant thump echoed through the valley, followed by another. The ground trembled beneath their feet as a low, guttural growl emanated from the shadows of the trees. Samuel's heart pounded as he looked up, eyes widening in horror. Emerging from the dense foliage were not one, but three towering figures. They were like the creature they had encountered before, massive, covered in thick, shaggy fur, their eyes burning with an unnatural intelligence. One of them raised a massive hand and slammed it against a tree trunk, the wood cracking under the sheer force. It was a warning. Elijah, still gripping his pickaxe, took an unsteady step backward. "Samuel," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Samuel's breath came in ragged gasps. "We need to leave, now." The creatures stepped closer, their enormous forms blocking the path back to their camp. The air was thick with tension, the only sound the rhythmic pounding of Elijah's pulse in his ears. Then, the largest of the three creatures let out a long, guttural howl, a sound that sent a primal terror through both men. Elijah dropped his pickaxe, his hands shaking. "We ain't meant to be here," he muttered. The creatures did not attack, but their message was clear. This gold did not belong to men. It was protected, guarded by beings older than time itself. Slowly, deliberately, Elijah and Samuel took a step back, then another, before turning and fleeing through the trees. Their dreams of riches abandoned in the face of something far more powerful than gold. The Sierras had spoken, and they had no choice but to listen. Word of the gold vein and the creatures spread through the nearby settlements like wildfire. Miners huddled around their campfires, recounting the tale in hushed voices, their eyes darting toward the shadowed tree line. Native tribes spoke of the ancient guardians of the mountains, beings that had long watched over the land, punishing those who dared take what was not theirs. Taverns filled with whispers of vanished prospectors, of eerie howls in the night, of men who entered the woods in search of riches and never returned. Some dismissed the stories as drunken fantasies, but others, those who had seen the fear in Elijah and Samuel's eyes, knew the truth. Something lurked in the Sierras, something watching, waiting, and it was not done yet. Samuel and Elijah returned to the vein, their eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of the creatures. The area was eerily quiet, no rustling of leaves, no distant calls of wildlife. The usual vibrance of the wilderness had been smothered by an unnatural silence. Gripping their tools, they set to work. The rhythmic clang of pickaxes striking stone filled the canyon, each strike shattering the stillness like a drumbeat of defiance. Gold dust and chunks of ore flaked from the rock face, shimmering in the dim morning light. Sweat trickled down their brows as they dug deeper, their breath coming in ragged bursts. Then the ground trembled beneath them. Samuel froze, pickaxe held mid-swing. Elijah's heart pounded as he turned his gaze toward the shadows between the trees. Nothing moved. No figures loomed at the edge of their vision. Yet the sensation of being watched grew stronger, pressing in around them like an unseen force. "We take what we can and we go," Samuel murmured, his voice tight with urgency. He filled a canvas sack with gold-laden rubble, his fingers working in frantic efficiency. Elijah did the same, stuffing his satchel with as much as it could hold. A distant guttural sound rolled through the trees, low and menacing. Samuel and Elijah exchanged a single, knowing glance. Without another word, they abandoned the remaining gold and bolted toward their camp, their boots pounding against the earth. Behind them, a massive shadow shifted in the tree line, the whisper of movement lost beneath the thunderous pounding of their own hearts. The Guardian's warning. That night, shaken and desperate for answers, Samuel and Elijah sought out a local Indian tribe, hoping their elders could explain what they had witnessed. The shaman spoke of the Shadow Guardian's origins. Intertwined with Mount Shasta, the great mountain believed to be a bridge between worlds. He described how the creatures were born from the mountain's ancient spirit, charged with safeguarding its sacred depths. Their connection to the land was eternal. They roamed the wilderness not as beasts, but as protectors of the mountain's power, punishing those who sought to exploit its riches. The firelight flickered against the elder's face as he warned them. The gold was not theirs to take, and the Shadow Guardians would not allow greed to defile the land. As the elder's voice wove the tale, the wind carried distant howls through the night, a chilling reminder that the creatures were watching and waiting. Through the night, a chilling reminder that the creatures were watching and waiting. The shaman's warning. Back at their camp, Samuel and Elijah sat in the dim glow of the fire, their minds heavy with the shaman's words. "The gold is cursed," Samuel murmured, rubbing a hand over his face. "They won't let us take it." Elijah exhaled sharply, staring into the flames. "If that's true, then every prospector in these mountains is in danger." A long silence stretched between them before Samuel spoke again. "Maybe it's not about the gold itself. Maybe it's about what happens when men dig too deep, when they forget that some things aren't meant to be taken." As the fire crackled, a distant howl echoed through the valley, sending a fresh wave of unease down their spines. The Shadow Guardians were still watching. They were warning. That night, a dozen miners gathered around the fire, their voices hushed yet frantic. Each man recounted his own harrowing tale: missing supplies, strange markings on trees, guttural howls in the night. Others described waking to find enormous footprints surrounding their tents, or catching fleeting glimpses of towering figures between the trees. One man swore he had seen a creature standing over the river at dawn, its massive form barely disturbed by the rushing water as it turned and vanished into the mist. Another claimed his mule had been taken in the dead of night, its panicked cries swallowed by the oppressive silence of the wilderness. A cold fear settled over the group. If the creatures were watching, what did they want? And how much longer before they acted? Realizing that they could not face these creatures alone, the miners formed a protective pact. Each man would contribute a share of his gold to a communal fund, ensuring that they could arm themselves, stand guard, and support one another. They built fortified barriers around their camp, posted night sentries, and vowed to defend each other at all costs. The mountains held dangers beyond human greed, and now survival meant standing together. The Bigfoot continued to monitor the miners, but kept its distance, its presence, a constant shadow in the wilderness, always watching, always waiting. One clear night, Samuel and Elijah sat by the dwindling fire when a low rustle disturbed the silence. The sound grew closer, heavy, deliberate footsteps pressing into the earth. The flames flickered, casting monstrous shadows as a deep, guttural growl resonated through the darkness. The presence lingered, circling their camp, watching, waiting. Hours passed, and the weight of unseen eyes pressed down on them, the realization dawning that they were not just being observed, but stalked. At dawn, Samuel and Elijah stood amidst the wreckage of their claim, fury burning in their veins. Their tools lay shattered, their hard work undone. The creatures had gone too far. Clenching their rifles, they exchanged a determined nod. They would track the beasts, follow their prints deep into the wilderness, and make them pay for what they had done. Samuel and Elijah stood amidst the wreckage of their claim, fury burning in their veins. Their tools lay shattered, their hard work undone. The creatures had gone too far. Clenching their rifles, they exchanged a determined nod. They would track the beasts, follow their prints deep into the wilderness, and make them pay for what they had done. The tracks were massive, sunken deep into the damp earth, leading away from their claim and vanishing into the dense forest. The early morning fog clung to the trees like ghostly shrouds, muting the world in an eerie silence. Every snapped twig beneath their boots sent a ripple of tension through their nerves. Samuel led the way, his rifle held at the ready, eyes scanning every shadowed grove and rocky outcrop. Elijah followed closely, his heart hammering like a war drum. The deeper they ventured into the forest, the more unnatural the air became, thick with a musky, almost rotten scent that grew stronger with every step. Hours passed. The sun had risen high above the canopy, yet the chill of unease never left them. The tracks led them through narrow ravines, over trickling streams, and finally to a clearing nestled between towering cliffs. The silence here was absolute. No birds sang, no insects hummed, only the sound of their own breathing and the soft rustling of the trees. Then came the first sign of movement. A branch snapped somewhere to their left. Samuel froze, motioning for Elijah to stay low. Slowly they crouched behind a fallen log, peering into the undergrowth. A shape shifted between the trees, a hulking figure partially obscured by foliage, its dark form blending almost seamlessly with the shadows. Elijah tightened his grip on his rifle, his pulse pounding in his ears. He could barely make out the creature's face, but its glowing amber eyes locked onto his own. They were not the eyes of a mindless beast. They were intelligent, calculating. Samuel inhaled sharply as another figure emerged from the trees to their right, a second creature just as massive as the first. The realization hit them like a bolt of lightning. They were surrounded. The two men slowly backed against the base of the cliff, their rifles raised. The creatures did not charge, did not growl. They simply watched, unmoving, as if assessing the intruders in their domain. A primal fear gripped Elijah's chest. He had faced grizzlies before, even fought off mountain lions, but this was something else, something beyond the realm of natural predators. Then, without warning, a deafening roar shattered the silence. The lead creature reared back, its powerful chest expanding before it let loose a second, ground-shaking cry. The sound was unlike anything Samuel or Elijah had ever heard, deep, reverberating, filled with a primal authority that made every hair on their bodies stand on end. Samuel fired first. The gunshot cracked through the clearing, echoing against the cliffs. The bullet struck the nearest creature's shoulder, but instead of collapsing, it let out a guttural snarl and recoiled, gripping the wound. The second creature lunged forward with terrifying speed, forcing the two men to scramble back. Elijah fired next, the shot grazing the beast's thick hide, barely slowing it down. Panic surged through them. These things were not just shadows in the night. They were flesh and blood, and they were enraged. Elijah grabbed Samuel's arm. "We have to move, now." With the creatures advancing, the men turned and ran, weaving through the trees with adrenaline-fueled desperation. The forest came alive with movement behind them, the sounds of snapping branches, heavy footfalls, and low rumbling growls closing in. They barely dodged a massive log that came hurtling through the air, smashing against the trunk of a nearby pine. Breath ragged, Samuel and Elijah pushed forward, their bodies screaming in protest. The creatures were driving them, herding them like prey. But to where? Then, through the thick underbrush, they saw it, a narrow cave opening in the rocky hillside ahead. "There!" Elijah shouted, grabbing Samuel's sleeve and yanking him toward it. With a final burst of speed, they dove inside just as the creatures reached the entrance. The two men scrambled deeper into the darkness, gasping for air as they pressed their backs against the cold stone. Outside, the creatures snarled and paced, their massive silhouettes blocking out what little daylight filtered through the cave mouth. For a moment, neither man moved. The sound of their own heaving breaths filled the confined space. Then, slowly, Samuel exhaled and met Elijah's wide-eyed gaze. "What the hell did we just get ourselves into?" The minutes stretched into an eternity. Samuel gripped his rifle with white-knuckled intensity, sweat beading on his forehead. He strained to hear beyond his own hammering heartbeat, listening for any sign that the creatures might retreat. But they did not leave. Instead, the creatures let out guttural, clicking sounds, communicating in low, almost rhythmic tones. One of them slammed a heavy fist against the rock face, sending a tremor through the cave. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Elijah held his breath, suddenly aware of just how precarious their position was. If the creatures wanted, they could collapse the entrance, trapping them inside. Samuel, in a state of frantic, said, "We can't stay here. They'll wait us out." Elijah scanned the cave, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The tunnel stretched deeper into the mountain, its depths swallowed in shadow. Then we go deeper. We find another way out. Neither option was good, but staying meant certain death. With a silent nod, they turned and pressed forward, disappearing into the dark unknown as the creatures continued their ominous vigil at the cave's entrance. The hunt was far from over. Samuel and Elijah pushed deeper into the cave, their boots crunching over loose stones and damp earth. The air grew thick, carrying an ancient, musky scent that clung to their throats. Every step echoed into the abyss, swallowed by a silence so absolute it pressed against their ears. Elijah ran his fingers along the cave wall, feeling its jagged, uneven texture. "This place ain't natural," he muttered under his breath. "Something's lived in here a long time." Samuel exhaled sharply. "And we're walking straight into its home." The tunnel twisted and narrowed, forcing them to crouch as they moved forward. The darkness was suffocating. Then Elijah's boot struck something hard. He knelt, brushing away the dirt to reveal rusted metal, an old miner's lantern, long abandoned. Elijah held it up, inspecting it. "This has been here for years." Samuel took it, pulling a match from his satchel. With a strike, the lantern's wick sputtered, catching flame. A weak, flickering glow illuminated the space around them, casting distorted shadows against the stone walls. The light did little to ease the pressing blackness beyond. "For now, we got light," Samuel said, adjusting the flame. "Let's make it count." As they ventured deeper, the passage widened, revealing towering stalactites that dripped with condensation. The floor sloped downward, slick with moisture, forcing them to move carefully. The deeper they went, the more they felt it, the weight of something unseen, pressing in from all sides. Then they reached a fork in the cave. Two paths stretched ahead, one leading downward into a gaping chasm, the other bending sharply to the left, disappearing around a jagged rock formation. A deep, rhythmic sound pulsed through the cavern, almost like breathing. Elijah wiped the sweat from his brow. Which way? Samuel lifted the lantern, peering down both tunnels. The left path was narrow, claustrophobic, but seemed solid. The right, however, was steep and dropped into a dark void. From somewhere below, a faint clicking sound echoed upward, a sound too deliberate, too patterned to be mere dripping water. Elijah shivered. You hear that? Samuel nodded slowly. Something's down there. The two men exchanged a glance. Neither wanted to admit what they feared, that they were not alone in the cave. Samuel exhaled. We take the left path. We need to keep moving, but we ain't climbing down into a pit with God knows what waiting for us. Elijah nodded, adjusting his grip on his rifle. Let's go. As they stepped toward the left passage, a gust of cold air swept through the tunnel, extinguishing the lantern's flame. Darkness swallowed them whole. A guttural sound echoed through the cavern. They were not alone. Samuel and Elijah clutched each other in the pitch-black void, their breath held tight in their lungs. Then, just as fear threatened to consume them, a faint glow shimmered in the distance, a light barely visible through the thick darkness. It was small, flickering, but undeniably real. Samuel whispered, "You see that?" Elijah nodded, though the movement was useless in the suffocating dark. Yeah, it ain't firelight, though. With cautious steps, they pressed forward, their hands brushing against the damp cave walls for guidance. The light grew stronger, illuminating the jagged tunnel ahead with an eerie luminescence. The closer they got, the more they noticed a change in the air, warmer, tinged with a scent that neither could place, something like earth after a fresh rain mixed with the metallic tang of minerals. Then they emerged into something they had never seen before. The tunnel opened into a vast underground cavern, so immense it seemed impossible that such a place could exist beneath the Sierra Nevadas. The ceiling stretched high above them, glistening with veins of glowing rock, casting a soft blue-green light across the expanse. Bioluminescent fungi sprouted from the cavern walls, their gentle luminescence rippling like waves as if responding to the men's presence. Elijah inhaled sharply. This ain't just a cave. This is something else. Before them lay an ancient underground valley, filled with towering stone formations and gnarled, twisted trees with bark the color of obsidian. A mist clung low to the ground, swirling around clusters of strange plants that pulsed with a faint internal glow. Waterfalls cascaded from unseen heights, their streams vanishing into the depths below, the sound of rushing water echoing hauntingly. Samuel swallowed, stepping cautiously forward. Ain't no man ever been here before, or if he has, he didn't live to tell about it. As they ventured further, they spotted something that made their blood run cold. Scattered among the glowing flora were crude structures, stone formations arranged with purpose, primitive carvings etched into the cavern walls. Bones, bleached white with age, lay in neat piles near the structures, some eerily human in shape. Elijah's hands tightened on his rifle. I don't like this, Samuel. Then, from the shadows beyond the light, a movement, swift and silent. A shape, hulking and indistinct, watched them from the darkness. It was not alone. A guttural growl, low and rumbling, echoed through the cavern. The shadows shifted, figures stepping into the glow of the cave's ethereal light. The creatures had been waiting for them. Samuel and Elijah froze, their muscles locking as the monstrous figures loomed closer, their hulking forms barely distinguishable in the dim glow of the cavern. The guttural growls deepened, vibrating through the walls and floor, shaking loose bits of rock and dust from above. Run, Samuel hissed, gripping Elijah's arm. They turned and bolted. Elijah's foot slipped on the damp stone, sending him stumbling, but Samuel yanked him up and forward. They careened back through the bioluminescent grove, crushing glowing fungi beneath their boots as monstrous shapes lunged in pursuit. The cavern walls echoed with the sounds of pursuit, grunts, rapid footfalls, and the occasional chuff of breath just behind them. The tunnel they had entered through was in sight, a mere sliver of darkness ahead. Samuel's heart pounded as he focused on that single exit, pushing forward with every ounce of strength. The creatures were close, too close. He could feel their presence pressing in, the air thick with the primal scent of damp fur and raw earth. They barreled into the tunnel, the passageway narrowing sharply. Behind them, a deafening roar filled the cavern, shaking the very walls. The creatures did not follow immediately, but their presence loomed just beyond the threshold. Elijah gasped for breath. They stopped. Samuel glanced back, adjusting his grip on the rifle. They ain't done with us yet. Then, as if to prove his words true, the guttural growl rumbled again, this time closer. The creatures had hesitated, but only for a moment. They were coming. Sammuel and Elijah burst from the cave entrance, their chests heaving, lungs burning from the frantic sprint through the tunnels. The night air outside was shockingly cold, the silver glow of the moon casting eerie shadows across the rocky terrain. Behind them, the guttural growls of the creatures echoed from deep within the cave, growing closer with each passing second. Elijah turned to Sammuel, his eyes wild. "We can't just leave it open. They'll follow us." Sammuel nodded, scanning the landscape. A pile of loose boulders and debris from previous rockfalls was strewn near the entrance. If they worked quickly, they could collapse the entrance, sealing whatever monstrosities lurked within the cavern. "Grab what you can," Sammuel barked, already digging his fingers under a hefty slab of stone. "We need to bring this whole damn place down." Elijah didn't hesitate. He scrambled up the rocky slope, kicking loose dirt and pebbles as he shoved boulders towards the mouth of the cave. Their breathing was ragged, muscles burning, but the urgency of their situation left no room for exhaustion. Then, from deep within the cave, came a blood-curdling screech. A shadow moved just beyond the threshold, massive and shifting unnaturally in the darkness. The creatures were near, their presence thick in the air like an oncoming storm. Sammuel threw his full weight against a precariously balanced boulder, sending it tumbling down. It crashed against the entrance with a thunderous impact, momentarily obscuring the opening with dust and rubble. Elijah fumbled with the dynamite in his satchel that was dropped during their escape earlier, hands trembling. "We gotta make sure they stay in there, Sammuel." Samuel's eyes flashed with determination. "Light it up." Elijah struck a match, the small flame flickering against the wind. He touched it to the fuse and threw the bundle of dynamite toward the base of the entrance. The two men dove behind an outcropping of rock, just as the explosion tore through the night. The ground rumbled, the cave entrance collapsing inward in a deafening roar of dust and debris. For a moment, silence. Then, a final, furious howl echoed from within the sealed cave before being swallowed by the settling rubble. Elijah coughed, waving a hand through the dust cloud. "You think that did it?" Samuel stood slowly, peering at the blocked passage, the jagged rockfall now burying whatever horrors lay beneath. "I sure as hell hope so." They stood there for a long moment, listening, waiting, but no further sounds came from the cave. Whatever lived in those depths was now entombed beneath the mountain. Elijah let out a shaky breath. "We ain't ever speaking of this again, are we?" Samuel shook his head. "No one would believe us anyway. Let's get out of here." With one last glance at the ruined cave entrance, they turned and walked into the darkness, leaving behind the secrets of the Sierra Nevadas forever. Back at camp, Samuel and Elijah sat in silence by the fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. The night was unusually quiet, the usual howls of wolves or rustling of nocturnal creatures absent. The mountain itself seemed to hold its breath. Elijah stared into the fire, rubbing his hands together. "That vein was the richest I ever seen, Samuel, and now it's buried under God knows how much rock." Samuel took a slow sip of whiskey from his flask, his expression unreadable. "Even if it weren't, you reckon you'd go back down there?" Elijah hesitated, gripping his tin cup tightly. The memory of those creatures, the way they moved, the unearthly sounds they made, still lingered in his mind like a waking nightmare. "No," he admitted, "not for all the gold in California." Samuel nodded, tossing a twig into the fire. "Then we best figure out what comes next." They sat in heavy silence, listening to the crackling flames. The weight of their decision settled between them like an invisible force. They had spent months searching for wealth, only to uncover something ancient and beyond their comprehension. And now, with their claims sealed under tons of rock, they were faced with a harsh truth. The dream was over. Elijah sighed, leaning back against a log. "You think anyone's gonna come looking for that gold? Word got round about our finding. Even if they don't believe in what's down there, greed's got a way of blinding men." Samuel exhaled through his nose. "Ain't our problem anymore. If someone's fool enough to go digging where they shouldn't, let 'em." Elijah frowned, shaking his head. "Don't sit right with me, leaving it open for others." Samuel took another sip of whiskey before offering the flask to Elijah. "We did what we had to, sealed that place tight. If a man's got it in his mind to crack it open again, that's on him. But we ain't going back." Elijah took the flask, drinking deeply before wiping his mouth. "So what now? We just pack up, head back east?" Samuel glanced up at the night sky, his jaw tightening. "Maybe, or maybe we find another claim. Something safer. Ain't no shortage of rivers in these hills." Elijah let out a hollow laugh. "Safer? After what we seen, I ain't sure there is such a thing." The fire popped, sending a swirl of embers into the air. The two men watched as they drifted upward, vanishing into the darkness. The mountain loomed behind them, silent and unmoving, but the weight of what lay beneath it pressed against their very souls. "One thing's for damn sure," Samuel muttered. "We ain't never speaking of this again." Elijah nodded, staring into the fire as the past few weeks replayed in his mind like a fever dream. He wanted to believe it was over, that the horrors of the cave would remain buried. But deep in his gut, he knew better. Some things were never meant to stay hidden, and some things never stayed buried for long. Thanks so much from Cryptid Monologues for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. And hey, while you're here, check out these videos. You'll definitely love them. See you in the next one.